So I want you to picture a bamboo basket.
Like a little decorative one?
No, no, not a small
Wow.
one sitting on a shelf. Like a really sturdy, intensely practical woven basket, the kind you'd actually use for washing rice.
No, okay. Got it.
Right. Now, imagine taking that humble, everyday object and like scaling it up to the size of an entire ocean bay.
That is a wild image.
It is. But that's the visual you need to hold in your head to really understand the origins of Shau Kei Wan. Because the name itself literally translates from Cantonese into something along the lines of a bay shaped like a rice washing basket.
Which is fascinating considering what it looks like now.
Exactly. I mean, if you visit this district on the northeastern edge of Hong Kong Island today, you're going to see this hyper-modern concrete jungle, towering high-rises, paved roads, traffic everywhere.
Total gridlock sometimes, yeah?
Right. But beneath all that modern infrastructure lies this wildly different past. I mean, it used to be this pirate-infested proto-urban fishing village, which is just crazy. So welcome to the Deep Dive. We are thrilled you're joining us today.
Yeah, it's just a massive physical and cultural transformation. And to guide us through how, a fishing village turns into a concrete metropolis, we're pulling from this remarkably comprehensive historical research report.
The Shau Kei Wan Historical Research Report.
Exactly. Titled simply the Shau Kei Wan Historical Research Report. And it's just packed with oral histories, declassified documents, municipal records. It's really dense.
It's a goldmine. And our mission today for this deep dive is to dig into 5 incredible historical stories from Shau Kei Wan based on this source. We're going to uncover some hidden physical gems too, like actual artifacts and locations that you can go and visit today.
Yeah, real things you can touch.
Exactly. But more than just, a historical sightseeing tour, we want to reflect on the invisible forces that secretly dictate the shape of the cities we all live in. Things like colonialism, global war, and the sometimes really ruthless nature of urban planning.
Right. I always like to think of modern cities as these incredibly complex computer hard drives.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, because over the decades, files get overwritten, directories are formatted, and whole operating systems are swapped out without the user even noticing.
Right. You just walk on the street and have no idea.
Exactly. So our job today is to help you recover some of those deleted files from the 19th and 20th centuries. Because the data is still there in the architecture and the culture, you just have to know exactly where to look.
And how to read it. So let's start recovering that first deleted file. And to do that, we actually have to start at the bedrock of the district.
Literally the bedrock, the stone under the ground.
Right. Because before Shau Kei Wan was a modern city, it was the quarry that essentially built Victoria City, which was the early colonial center of Hong Kong.
Yeah, in the 1840s, right after the British established their colonial presence, they immediately needed high-quality building materials for their capital.
They needed granite.
Exactly, lots of it. And this massive sudden demand drew a large influx of Hakka stonecutters from mainland China.
And the Hakka, just for context, they're a distinct Han Chinese subgroup, right?
Yes. Their name actually translates to guest families because they have this long, long history of migration. And they migrated to this specific area of Shau Kei Wan because it had these rich, really easily accessible granite outcrops right on the water's edge.
Which makes sense. Being right on the coast made loading and shipping all that heavy stone across the harbor, incredibly efficient.
Way easier than dragging it over a mountain, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I do want to pause on the reality of that work, though. Because this was not, a casual, well-regulated mining operation.
Oh, no.
These Hakka stonecutters were working in these intensely dangerous, disease-ridden environments.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a gritty, high-mortality existence on the absolute fringes of the colonial capital.
Yeah, people were dying. It was brutal work.
Right. And when you're living on the edge like that, doing dangerous manual labor every single day, you need some serious spiritual backup. So they actually imported their hometown deity.
A deity named Tam Kung. And historically speaking, Tam Kung was a figure who supposedly achieved enlightenment way back during the Yuan dynasty.
That's the Mongol rule period, right?
Right.
Around the 13th or 14th century.
Exactly. And he's typically depicted in statues and carvings with the face of a child. But here's the interesting part. Back in the inland, mountainous regions where these Hakka stonecutters originally came from, Tam Kung was known for some very specific miracles.
Like what?
Well, he cured local diseases, he predicted the mountain weather, and he warded off tigers.
Okay, wait, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because bringing your hometown god with you is like packing your favorite brand of tea when you move abroad, right?
Sure, yeah.
You want that comfort of home, you want something familiar in a strange new place. But what's crazy about this story is that the tea basically changed flavors.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. I mean, these stonecutters brought a mountain god to a coastal harbor, and his job description got a massive update. How does a god who fights tigers suddenly become useful on the ocean?
Well, migrant networks are just incredibly pragmatic. They actively re-engineered their religious beliefs to survive this totally new economic and physical reality.
They had to.
Yeah, I mean, these stonecutters weren't worrying about mountain tigers anymore. Their daily threats were now typhoons, unpredictable tides, dangerous marine logistics.
A tiger god doesn't help you with a tidal wave.
Exactly. So Tamkung couldn't just be a mountain god if he was going to be useful. So the community collectively decided, he now possesses the powers of typhoon prediction and marine protection.
That is such a huge structural shift in the local folklore. Because, the mainstream historical narrative usually claims that the indigenous boat-dwelling people there, the Tanka, only worship Tin Hau, right?
Yeah.
The traditional goddess of the sea.
Right, that's the standard story. But Tamkung's evolution proves that these migrant Hakka stonecutters fundamentally altered the maritime culture of early Hong Kong. It wasn't just Tin Hau anymore.
And they affectionately call Tam Kung, Kung, right? Which
Mhm.
basically translates to grandfather or like a highly respected elder.
Yeah, a kung.
So the rocky shoreline where they lived and worked and worshipped actually became known as a Kungam.
Though, in the spirit of historical rigor, we should note that some scholars, like James Hayes, have debated whether a kung originally just referred to a literal human elder in the community who held a lot of respect.
Oh, interesting. So it might have been a real guy first.
Maybe.
Did it?
But regardless of the exact linguistic etymology, the physical space undeniably became tied to the deity. By 1905, this migrant community had pooled their meager resources and crowdfunded a formal Tamkung temple right on the coast.
It was basically their town hall, their school, like the absolute center of their community.
Completely.
And if you visit Shau Kei Wan today, that temple is still there. It's a beautifully preserved Great Eye historic building on Tam Kung Temple Road. But if you go, I want you to look past the building itself. Look in front of the temple.
Oh, yes. The rock.
Yes, there is this giant, distinctively shaped rock sitting right out in the open. Locals call it Tam Kung's seal.
And when most tourists walk by, they probably just see, like, a quirky landscaping boulder at a small fishing temple.
Yeah, exactly. But now you know the context.
Mm.
That rock is a physical, tactile marker of the Hakka stonecutters' legacy. It is literally a piece of the bedrock that built the city.
But, the very same geographical features that made this bay perfect for extracting granite.
The deep waters and all that.
Yeah, its deep waters and its strategic location at the harbor's edge. Those features also made it a massive military choke point for the British Empire.
Right.
So you suddenly have this sacred community space forced to share a backyard with a massive colonial ammunition depot.
Because Shau Kei Wan sits right at the Lei Yumun Channel,
Oh,
right? It's like the narrowest eastern entrance to Victoria Harbor.
Exactly.
So if you are a colonial power trying to protect your main port, this is exactly where you put your heavy guns. I mean, the colonial government built forts, artillery batteries, and a Royal Engineers ammunition depot right on the hillside behind where the locals were living and worshiping.
They forcefully overlaid a colonial military space onto a localized religious space.
Which is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
And in March 1946, that tension literally exploded.
It did. The Ekong Ingam ammunition depot detonated, and the sheer scale of the disaster was just staggering.
Oh, I read the accounts. Shockwaves and literal walls of fire swept right down the main street, causing massive civilian casualties.
It severely damaged the nearby Tin Hau Temple, too, a structure from 1845 that had already famously survived a catastrophic typhoon back in 1874.
But the historical records actually offer two very different explanations for what stopped the total destruction of the town, right?
Yeah, the official versus unofficial story.
Right, because if you look at the declassified British military files, they attribute the halting of the fire to a sudden change in wind direction and the physical presence of blast bunds. Hold on, can you explain what a blast bund actually is?
Yeah, sure. So a blast bund is essentially a massive engineered earthwork, like a huge mound of dirt built around an explosive storage site.
Okay.
And the physics behind it is quite simple. If an explosion occurs, the dirt wall forces the kinetic energy in the fire upwards into the sky. It stops it from blasting outwards horizontally into the, surrounding civilian areas.
So the military files argue these buns did their job.
Exactly. They say the engineering worked.
But if you dig into the oral histories of the locals who actually lived through it, they tell a completely different story.
Oh, completely.
They claim the fire was roaring down the hill toward the temples, ignoring the blast buns entirely, and then just miraculously extinguished itself right before it could burn the sacred spaces to the ground. A pure divine intervention.
Yeah.
So I have to ask, is this just a classic case of science versus superstition? Or is there something deeper happening here with how a community processes massive trauma?
I think it's definitely the latter. When a marginalized community faces a catastrophic technological disaster imposed on them by an external military force, a narrative of divine protection becomes a crucial coping mechanism.
Right, I mean, it's the whole thing.
It's a psychological way to reclaim agency in a situation where they had absolutely zero control. But honestly, what is perhaps even more remarkable than the miracle narrative is what happened after the smoke cleared.
Oh, the negotiations.
Yes. The local Chinese community, spearheaded by the temple committees, banded together and successfully negotiated with the colonial government.
And they didn't just ask for an apology or a plaque. They forced the British military to pay for the rebuild.
It's incredible. The colonial government had to allocate special funds to compensate for the damage and completely rebuild the temple by 1948.
That is unheard of.
Historically speaking, yes. A local community successfully extracting civil compensation from a colonial military authority for a destroyed religious site is incredibly rare. It marks a distinct moment where the colonial government was forced to compromise with rising local civic power.
And you can still see the physical scars of this negotiation today. If you visit the Shau Kei Wan Tin Hau Temple on Shau Kei Wan Main Street East, you'll notice something really odd. It looks sunken.
Right, because of all the road work.
Exactly. Because of decades of land reclamation and modern roads being built higher and higher, the temple now sits lower than the street level around it. But if you walk inside, look for the plaques on the walls.
They're a great find.
There's one from the 1876 restoration after the typhoon, and crucially, the records of the 1948 rebuild funded by the British military. It's quite literally a permanent, carved receipt of a community holding an empire accountable.
That's a great way to describe it. But, that colonial military footprint didn't just cause accidental tragedies, though.
No, it didn't.
Its strategic location drew intentional imperial violence right to the district's doorstep.
Right. Let's set the scene for December 1941, the outbreak of the Pacific War. The Japanese military is pushed down from the mainland, and the sky over Victoria Harbor is entirely black.
Yeah, completely obscure.
We're talking thick, choking smoke because the massive oil depots at North Point have been bombed and are just burning out of control.
Right.
And under the cover of this immense smoke screen, the Japanese 229th Regiment makes their move.
The British and Allied forces were trying to defend the island, but that oil smoke completely blinded them. So on the night of December 18th, the Japanese forces crossed the rough, turbulent waters of the harbor in small boats.
And they didn't just land on a random stretch of sand, did they?
No. They executed a precise beachhead, landing exactly at the Tamkung Temple at Akung-Nagam.
They literally stormed the beach and took the temple. I mean, this wasn't just a military occupation. It was a total defilement of a sacred space.
Absolutely.
They ripped the Tamkung statue, the deity the stonecutters had adapted a century earlier, out of its shrine.
Yeah.
They replaced it with the Japanese Buddha they had brought with them. Then they turned the temple into a temporary frontline command post to coordinate their attack and break the eastern defense lines.
And mainstream history usually focuses on the famous final stands in the center or south of Hong Kong Island. But this specific landing at the Tamkung Temple was the domino that broke the Eastern Defense Network.
It's just wild to think about.
It is. It's a stark, brutal example of total war, where a peaceful civilian space of community worship is violently co-opted into the machinery of imperial aggression.
But I want you to imagine walking past a local school today, just a normal, everyday building, because what happened after the war is fascinating.
Oh, the flower bed story.
Yes. According to local legend, as soon as the Japanese surrendered, the locals immediately brought Tamkung back to his rightful place. But what did they do with the Japanese Buddha? They supposedly hauled it over to a nearby art school, which used to be an old village school, and just dumped it in the flower bed.
Just tossed it in the dirt.
Wait, they really just casually tossed a sacred statue into the dirt? like a Buddha.
Well, we don't have official colonial archives verifying the flowerbed story, obviously, but as a piece of oral history, it's incredibly potent.
Yeah, I can see that.
It represents an act of community cleansing. It was the local residents physically scrubbing the stain of colonial aggression from their spiritual home and reestablishing their own order in the most dismissive way possible.
That is so powerful. And if you go inside the Tamkong Temple today, there is a piece of history you absolutely must look for.
Right. Keep an eye out for a stone restoration plaque dated 1944.
1944, that is right in the middle of the Japanese occupation.
Exactly. Finding a plaque from the Japanese occupation era is exceedingly rare in Hong Kong.
I would imagine so.
Yeah, because after the war, due to the obvious political sensitivities and just the sheer trauma of the occupation, most physical records from that period were deliberately destroyed or ground smooth.
But this plaque survived.
It did. It is a tangible survivor of a community trying to hold on to its spiritual identity and maintain its temple under the most extreme conditions of military rule.
It's amazing. So we've talked about how explosions and war reshaped this district, but the force that truly permanently erased the original coastline of Shau Kei Wan wasn't a bomb or an invading army. It was a fire, followed by some very aggressive urban planning.
Yeah. After World War II, Hong Kong experienced a massive influx of refugees fleeing instability on the mainland.
The population just exploded.
It did. And the city's formal housing was entirely inadequate to handle the sheer volume of people. So hundreds of thousands of people built makeshift squatter settlements. Aldrich Bay, with its calm, protected waters, became a massive, unregulated hybrid community.
Hybrid meaning land and water, right?
Yes. You had densely packed wooden huts creeping up the steep hillsides and thousands of people living on wooden boats lashed together in the water.
I want to make sure we picture this correctly. This was an entire water world.
Literally.
There was no running water, no proper electricity grid, terrible sanitation. People built makeshift wooden planks connecting hundreds of boats so you could walk across the water to buy groceries from a floating vendor.
It was incredibly dense.
It was organic, chaotic, but an incredibly tight-knit community holding it all together. And then, on February 1st, 1976, which happened to be the second day of the Lunar New Year, a 5-alarm fire broke out.
The worst possible timing.
Because everything was made of dry wood and lashed so closely together, the fire engines and fireboats couldn't even reach the core of the flames. In just 3 hours, over 1,000 homes were incinerated. 3,000 people were left totally homeless during the biggest family holiday of the year.
And the official fire department records point to a simple, tragic accident, an overturned kerosene stove in one of the wooden huts. But if you dig into the oral histories of the locals, a much darker structural conspiracy theory emerges.
Right, and we should be clear here. We aren't saying this is historical fact. We aren't taking sides. We're just reporting what's in the sources. But some locals suspected the colonial government either turned a blind eye to, or perhaps even capitalized on, these massive squatter fires.
It's a pervasive theory.
And the fact that this theory even exists tells you everything you need to know about the lack of trust between the community and the government at the time. The theory hinges on the fact that the government desperately needed to clear that highly valuable coastal land to build the Eastern Corridor Highway and the new MTR subway system.
Which is true. They did need the land.
Right. And evicting thousands of people legally takes years. A fire clears the land in 3 hours.
Well, regardless of how the fire actually started, the way the government reacted illustrates what urban sociologists call colonial spatial discipline.
Ooh, what does that mean?
So, before the fire, Aldrich Bay was organic, messy, and entirely self-governing. It was incredibly difficult for the government to map, to police, or to tax.
It was basically a massive administrative blind spot.
Precisely. But after the fire, the government rapidly cleared the ashes, filled in the bay with reclaimed land, and moved the survivors into standardized, grid-like public housing estates.
Ah, I see.
They deliberately replaced a wild, marine-oriented edge space with a highly regulated, easily administrable urban grid. They forced a water-based community onto dry land, into concrete boxes they could control.
So the government got their highway, and the water community was dispersed.
Yep.
And if you visit today, you can walk through the beautifully manicured Aldrich Bay Park or the Oi Tung Public Housing Estate. They are lovely, modern spaces with playgrounds and benches. But as you walk through them, you have to realize you are literally walking over the buried ashes of thousands of wooden boats and homes.
It's sobering.
The ground beneath you used to be the ocean.
And as that land was reclaimed, pushing further and further out into the water, the original masters of the harbor were literally squeezed out of existence.
We're talking about the boat builders.
I am. By the mid-20th century, Shau Kei Wan was one of the biggest fishing hubs in Hong Kong, which naturally meant it had a booming industry of boat builders.
Right. One of the most famous was Pui Kee Shipyard, founded in the 1950s by a man named Mr. Wong Pui. They built massive 150-foot wooden ocean-going fishing vessels entirely by hand.
And their crowning achievement actually came in 1980. The famous shipping magnate Y.K. Pao commissioned them to build a full-scale replica of a legendary 19th century Chinese junk, the Qiang, for an exhibition in London.
The Qiang too, actually.
Yes.
Oh.
Pui Kee Shipyard built the Qiang second flawlessly. And here is the incredible part. They did it without a single Western modern blueprint.
Wait, hold on. How do you build a 150-foot ocean-going vessel without a blueprint? Like, how do you ensure it doesn't just snap in half in rough seas?
They relied entirely on traditional Chinese boat-building intuition and a technique called lofting.
Lofting.
Yeah, which is passed down through generations via a master-apprentice model. They used small-scale wooden models and just an intuitive understanding of how wood bends and structural forces distribute.
So no paper schematics at all.
No. Rather than relying on paper, they proved that these traditional methods were just as structurally sound, if not better suited for certain waters, than modern steel ships drafted by engineers.
That is just incredible mastery. But despite this absolute mastery of their craft, they were rewarded with eviction.
Sadly, yes.
As the government kept filling in the bay to create more real estate, the shipyard was forced to move again and again, from Poman Street to Namon Street, and finally they were shoved into a tiny, cramped plot back at a Kungangam.
And because the new space is so incredibly small, they physically can no longer build new ships. Their primary function, their art, was basically stripped away. Today, they're reduced to merely repairing old vessels and patching up seasonal dragon boats.
The tragic irony here is wild.
Yeah.
I mean, the government proudly shows off this shipyard's magnificent work in London, presenting it to the world as this great cultural treasure.
Look what we built.
Right. But back home, they are actively paving over the artisan's workspace to build apartment blocks. It is exactly like asking a master chef to bake a 5-tier wedding cake and then forcing them to work out of a broom closet.
That's a perfect analogy, and it perfectly illustrates the death of the blue economy.
The blue economy.
Yes. The city deliberately transitioned from a marine-oriented production economy where people made their living directly from the water through fishing, stone cutting, and boat building, to a land-oriented consumption economy focused on real estate, retail, and high-rises.
But the shipyard is still there, though, and it is an incredible sensory experience for a tourist if you know where to look. If you walk down a Kungam Village Road today, you'll find Pui Kee Shipyard. Look at their rusting iron gate.
Oh, the gate is beautiful.
You can still see the intricate, hand-painted structural blueprint of the Qiang II fading on the metal.
And if you stand right there by the gate, you can actually smell it. The scent of raw timber mixing with heavy, thick engine oil. It is the fading aroma of an entire era of maritime history desperately hanging on in a tiny corner of a modern metropolis.
Wow. We have covered Hakka stonecutters updating their gods, explosive military disasters, wartime invasions, devastating squatter fires, and master shipbuilders forced into broom closets. Let's pull this all together. What is the overarching narrative of this city based on the report?
If we look at the historical sources holistically, 3 distinct macro-historical patterns emerged that shaped Shau Kei Wan, and honestly, they shape many modern cities globally.
Okay, let's hear them.
First is colonial discipline, which is the relentless drive by administrative authorities to take wild, unregulated, self-sufficient spaces and force them into standardized, taxable grids.
Right, taking the organic, messy boat village and turning it into a neat row of concrete public housing blocks that can easily policed and taxed.
Exactly. Second is the military squeeze. This is how global geopolitical logistics, like building forts, ammunition depots, or plotting invasion routes, literally crush local daily life. Communities are forced to adapt, rebuild, or relocate constantly in the crossfire of empires.
And the third pillar is land defeating ocean.
Yes. The deliberate economic choice to prioritize land-based real estate over water-based production. The ocean wasn't just pushed back physically by pouring dirt into it, it was pushed out economically and culturally. The people who relied on the sea were made obsolete by the people who relied on the pavement.
Man, when you think about it like that, a simple walk down a modern street in Shau Kei Wan, past the towering high-rises and the trendy coffee shops,
Mm.
it is actually a walk over a conquered ocean. The land won the war against the water.
Yep. The deleted files of the city have been recovered.
I want to leave you with a thought about your own surroundings. We started this deep dive by picturing a humble bamboo basket transformed into a concrete jungle. Think about the city or town you live in right now. What natural boundaries, rivers, or organic messy communities were paved over to build the orderly streets you drive on every single day. Next time you're standing on solid concrete waiting for a bus or walking to a coffee shop, ask yourself, what ghosts of the old economy are buried right under your feet? Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. Keep questioning the ground you walk on.